This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Okay, joining me now, Brian Voth, president of IntelliFarm and also vice president of the League of Extraordinarily Tall Gentlemen. Just so you know, Brendan Turner is the president. You might have to duke it out to take him out of that position. Anyway.
You know he's not any taller than me, though. Right?
That is irrelevant to this conversation, Brian.
Just saying.
Anyway, I really do hope that many people listening have met both of you, and then they know that I don't see past either of your belly buttons. So there you go. Okay, let's talk. We're kicking off the year. It's January. I don't do resolutions. We're not going to talk about that. But it feels like, of course, we've turned the page. We are now eyes forward, looking at what that seeding weather is going to be, when we're going to get in the ground. We're finalizing all those plans. And of course, a huge part of that, where I want to start, is on our cost of production. So I'm going to assume, because I know you're on this, that many of those cropping plans are pretty much done already, and cost of production, of course, plays in. So what have you seen in those numbers with your clients as to any surprises, anything looking better than last year? Where do we sit on cost of production?
Well, I guess no surprise that it's still expensive to farm, which I'm not sure there's ever a year where it hasn't been. But, you know, with long-term averages, it still looks like, you know, maybe aside from the last couple of weeks of price action, obviously, but it looks like, you know, we're still in a position to pencil in some better than long-term average margins. But one thing to keep in mind is that we are definitely coming down still from the last couple of years. And, you know, a lot of farms had just absolutely massive profit margins in the last few years with these high prices, even with, you know, smaller yields necessarily, but the prices were more than making up for it. And that's, I think, that might be the toughest pill to swallow, is the fact that margins are trending their way back towards, you know, more average levels, and not, you know, 2, 3, 4 times what we would normally see on a grain farm anyways. And that's again, it's a bit of a tough pill for some farms to swallow, to look at this and say, like, oh, I can only pencil in, you know, an $80 an acre return or $100 an acre, not $400 an acre. Like, this sucks. And, you know, and it's kind of, we got to be the voice of reason and say, but you realize this is more like average prior to the last couple of years.
Exactly.
And
the fact that you can still pencil out profit should be good.
And that was going to be my next comment, is it's not red.
Yes.
So a lot of the times when we do budgets, it's like, oh boy, nothing is really penciling out. You know, when you go conservative on your estimated price, just for the amount of unknowns, obviously, and, you know, you go conservative on yield, which hopefully gives you a bit of a worst case scenario, and it's like, oh, we're barely breaking even, or we're not breaking even. Like, yeah, we're still sitting in a pretty good spot for most commodities. There are definitely some that pencil out much better than others. But overall, you know, as it stands right now, provided prices don't drop a huge amount from where we are today yet, yeah, it's still going to be, again, obviously assuming you get moisture and you get some normal yields, it's still going to pencil out fairly decently. That said, there's a lot of variables in there in terms of when farms have bought inputs as well.
Right. So a few things there that you hit on that I did want to talk about a little bit. Moisture, of course, the outlook for those dry areas is not great. So we know that for those who lacked moisture last year, might be much of the same this year. So there is that caveat. But yes, that is the one question I have on the input side. You know, certainly we've heard rumblings of still, you know, some farmers trying to source certain things that are still maybe elevated in price, haven't come down. Are there any sort of sticking points that farmers are really having a tough time sort of pricing in a better price?
I mean, inputs have come obviously way down from where we've been in the last couple of years. And so on that front alone, it's like, well, we're already starting off in a better position from a cost perspective. Now, obviously, the output side has come way down as well. So, you know, we've done some pre-pricing for next year as well. We were fairly aggressive for 2023 again, it's always an interesting conversation on this one to me, because farms are much more willing to go and spend money on fertilizer regardless of where the price is than they are to go and, say, sell something for a fall delivery because they know they're going to need cash flow or bin space, because one is perceived as very risky and the other one is, well, I'm going to need this fertilizer anyways no matter what the price is. But to me, especially in the last couple of years when we've had such high priced fertilizers, like you're buying extremely expensive fertilizer, but you have the opportunity to sell really expensive grain as well. So these two need to go hand in hand. And there's been times where we've actually advised to sell grain and not buy fertilizer, logistics aside, and that is a different conversation because of just some farms were buying fertilizer purely because they know they could get it, and they're like, I'm okay paying a little bit more and having it in my bin at home than maybe paying less down the road, but not knowing if I'm going to have it for spring. So we tend to try and tie fertilizer purchases along with grain pricing hand in hand, because it is one of the most expensive inputs into growing a crop. So if you can offset it by selling 10%, 15%, 5 bushels an acre, however you want to look at it, then at least that, okay, I am selling a high priced commodity to pay for high priced fertilizer. These two go hand in hand. So,
and being willing to actually pull that trigger and make that commitment, because although I guess that again, that recency bias sort of gets us right as well, is that I think a lot of people got burned by not having product when they needed it, and that creates, you're paying a premium, but you have the peace of mind that it's in, that you can hold it, that you've got it, but you've got to still run the numbers. So peace of mind is one thing, but you still have to be able to pay those bills when they come due with the grain that you got. So definitely a good point. I did want to ask, in making some of those crop budgets, which one's the stinker right now?
Which one?
Oats. Yeah, oats. Is it oats?
No, oats actually pencils out as one of the best crops for 2024.
Okay, don't say that too loud or else everyone will grow it and will ruin things, Brian.
Wow, but oats in the last couple of years have been on this massive pendulum from one side to the other. We had a small crop in 2021, obviously, which led to double-digit oat prices, which was just ridiculous on its own, which of course led to huge acres in 2022, and then obviously down to more, still above average, long-term average, but down into like $4 oats, because who wants to grow $4 oats anymore? And which then led to a massive cut in acres in 2023, which now has brought stocks way back down again. So like oats is just on this big roller coaster ride over the last couple of years. But again, using long-term average yields and even using conservative pricing that you could go and price today, let's say, for this coming fall, oats pencils out extremely well, and more so than actually almost any other cereal crop.
Oh my gosh. All right, everybody eat your oatmeal. Let's make sure we eat through that supply. Okay, let's move into markets a little bit. I know, as you've mentioned, maybe not the most stellar heading into the holidays and kicking off. Am I being fair? Maybe not. Perhaps being a bit too rosy. It feels like, though, Brian, whenever Sean invites you on here, you don't have good news. So we're going to call the oat discussion the good news, or rather that you can still make some money on some of these crops, but price-wise and what's going on in the market, not ideal, but catch us up to speed. Let's maybe start with canola.
To be fair, it's only in like the last 18 months that has started to happen.
To be fair, it's only in the last yes, only the last 18. Okay, all right, let's start with canola.
Canola has really taken it on the chin relative to some of the other commodities, like especially compared to soybeans here in the last little while. And we have dropped back down to, we're not actually quite back down to where we were at the end of May, which, I don't know, maybe feels like a repressed memory for some people, because it was end of May. We were actually down to like 625 futures on the March chart I'm looking at, before we rallied back up to, over $800 a ton. And it was unfortunate. It was a really bad set of timing for this, because that rally up in July, we were like, yep, good. We can sell $18, $19 canola, whatever it was. Like, awesome, let's do this. at the exact same time, clients were calling saying, no, we got to cut our yield expectations in half. We're not going to have a crop. We're not selling anything else. And it's unfortunate because our hands were tied. We can't do anything about it, obviously. We have to keep that production risk in mind. The frustrating part is then to get to harvest and have yields that were better than what we were originally budgeting off of to begin with. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, I've looked at it a little bit here in the last few days, and if you pencil in, $18 canola that you could have sold back in July, but you're using, let's just say a 30 bushel yield or something like whatever, like a 2/3 of a normal yield, versus, today we're sitting down at like $14, something like that, canola, maybe $15 canola for spring. But a lot of farms ended up pulling off, 45-ish bushel canola. I'm talking southern Manitoba, obviously, just so that I don't get, blasted over this for saying some of these numbers. But, from a purely financial perspective, farms are still actually better off today, despite the fact that prices of canola are, $4 a bushel lower. The yield versus what was being penciled in July has far more than made up for the drop in price. Mm-hmm. But, what do we tend to focus on? It's like, well, it's $14 canola. This is like poverty canola now compared to July.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an important thing to look at sometimes and keep in perspective. Also, just in perspective that $14 canola, if you go back outside of the last 3.5 years, $14 canola you would have dreamt about selling your entire life.
Yep.
So,
yes.
Just, another thing to keep in mind.
Okay, but it is like, this is the part of the discussion where we talk about that emotional and sort of those head games, the mental sort of fortitude you need to be able to exactly that, have these very clear conversations, run the numbers of like, it might feel worse to take $14 canola, but you gotta take it all the way through the entire math problem to see that maybe $14 isn't so bad.
And this is where I think my clients might get annoyed with me saying that I don't really care how you feel about it. Math is math, and math doesn't lie. So,
I don't care about your feelings, says Brian. Okay, let's touch on wheat.
Neither does the market. So
no, okay, so that is the key point, though, right? Exactly. You're dealing with a market that does not care what you've sold at in the past, or what you have in the bin, or what your cost of production is. The market does not care. You've just got to make the decisions that are right for your farm and your cash flow. So there you go. All right.
On the plus side here for canola, I will say that given where we have dropped down to at this point, and looking at canola relative to soybeans and canola crush margins, there should be, I've got to wait and see if this actually happens or not, but these prices should be encouraging a lot more demand at this point already, because canola is now actually undervalued as an oil seed, where the last 3 years we were super overpriced. Super
expensive. Yeah.
So if you're looking for a silver lining, I would say that's probably it, that we have probably dropped to a point that there should be a lot more interest showing up for Canadian canola now.
That's a positive, Brian. Look at that. You did it. You pulled out a positive, a good news story. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we just end there?
It wasn't quite the positive sandwich thing,
the good, bad, good sandwich. Yeah. We got to work on the good, bad, good sandwich.
This was the cherry on the top, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. That's of, oatmeal. Okay, yeah, it's still not cake. It's oatmeal. Let's talk wheat before we wrap up. Let's talk wheat.
Wheat, it's been an interesting 24 months, or 23, I guess, since Russia invaded Ukraine, and that has led to some pretty wild wheat markets. Again, there too, like when we had that $5 a bushel rally in February, March, April of 2022, there's just been a lot of, I guess, I don't know, complacency is maybe the best word. Everybody got very comfortable with double-digit wheat prices, and we're sitting here and going like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's no way that this lasts. And then and then you see some other people talking about, wheat's going to like 20 or $25 a bushel. I'm like, okay, but how many bushels do you have to sell to get there? Yeah. And I don't know. It was really good for basically 1 or 2 crop years. But now that we're back into, again, and this even sounds dumb to say, like we're talking about $9 wheat today, let's say in southern Manitoba. Well, prior to 2022, $9 wheat, you could count on one hand how many times you ever saw it.
Yeah.
And it's just something to keep in perspective. And that has nothing to do with not saying anything about profitability of it, because wheat right now is basically back to a rotational crop. Like trying to pencil in a profit on, $8.50 or $9 wheat is extremely tough to do, unless if you have a very, very tight budget on, not so much on your seed chemical fertilizer, but more so on your fixed costs. If you run a very, very tight ship on that one, you can probably pencil out a profit, but it's going to be tough and you need the yield. So, but this is not untypical of wheat. Again, if you look back at wheat prior to the last few years, that's always been the case on wheat.
On the agronomy side, it's always, well, why do you always talk yield? You should be talking about profit per acre. And when it comes to grain marketing, it's like, why do you always talk about price? It should be on your profit per bushel. So it's the same conversation. We get hung up on yield numbers, but they mean nothing if we don't include the economics. And we get hung up on price, and it means nothing if we don't follow it through. So there you go. We could probably go through all the crops, but we're out of time, so we won't. But I will say, in looking ahead, it's January. How excited are you for for Ag Days later this month?
Oh man, I was just pricing. I was just looking at my calendar and I'm like, okay, so we got Saskatoon next week. We got Brandon the following week. I haven't been at Brandon since 2020.
Oh,
I mean, well, they missed 2 years, and then last year trying to travel out of Southern Ontario last year was an absolute disaster. So I missed that one, and so I'm excited to get out there, even if it's just for a day. And unlike you, I can walk around and I can see everybody.
Yeah, I just get lost in the shuffle. In the hallways. I still love it. It's still a great show. And as you mentioned, it's Crop Week next week. All the shows get going here now. And this week is the Ontario Ag Conference and SWAC. So that's where Sean is. That's why he's not on the show. I assumed
he was just hanging out in Phoenix, actually.
Well, wouldn't we all love to do that? All right. Okay. Brian Voth of IntelliFarm, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.